We are going to begin our journey with this video through one of the larger goshos written by Nichiren. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Glad you're here. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Yes, this is on repaying debts of gratitude. And that title is an interesting title because this gosho, well, of course, we're a complex being. It had many motivations, but not least of which, for Nichiren, was the death of his first great teacher at Shotoji, when he left his family, went to this temple, teaching school and temple, at the age of 12. And so the master that was heading him up in his studies at the time had passed away. And as one is wont to do, one dwells on the memory and the place in history, the place in oneself, one's own development, that this very important, father replacing at age of 12, mentor. It's a very, very important relationship in Nichiren's development and his life. And at the time, as we already know, other schools were had infected the Tendai school in Japan. Dengyo was largely set aside for revisionists that came in and debunked, or not debunked, but demoted the Lotus Sutra in favor of other hand positions and all sorts of rituals, and they gained the favor of the samurai shogunate, right? Because they stand on ritual all the time. So there was a lot of either just watering down or outright errors or misleading, intentionally misleading words, rituals, teachings pushed into the Tendai school, becoming then the true word school, or the Nembutsu, some form of Nembutsu, chanting Amida Buddha, Zen, and so on. And so in Nichiren's lifetime, he watched all of this, happening, even to the effect of his own teacher, who later in life started to gravitate more toward Shakyamuni Buddha again, and those origins of the Lotus Sutra, right? So there's a long, lifelong relationship from Nichiren with this mentor. And as a sort of an homage and a dedication, a memorial, he wanted to write a thesis about these aspects of our human experience in vis-a-vis the Lotus Sutra, and in so doing explore a lot of different ideas about motivations and inspiration and insights within this practice of Myoho Renge Kyo, and have it read out loud in the memoriam to his teacher, his great teacher, and to be read aloud at the place, the exact geographic location on a mount where he, Nichiren, first chanted aloud Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. So this is it's a memoriam, but it's a very profound teaching, and he'll go this way and that, as he often does, quoting from sutras, quoting from treatises, quoting from many sources in Buddhism. And of course, because of the situation, he won't spare any jabs at these interlopers, these other schools that work against the true teaching of Buddhism. And so, because he has all this ground to cover, this ends up being quite a long Gosho. So we'll take it one step at a time. There will be nuggets and jewels of understanding and scholarship in each of these videos. But if you see this title on Repaying Debts of Gratitude repeated in the in the list of videos, it's because there will be, some 20-25 parts probably. It'll take a while to get through this one. But I encourage you to watch them in order, simply because there's bound to be a great deal of understanding and insight in and throughout this Gosho. So, if I can, the Gosho's long enough. If I could just shut up and get to it, right? Anyway, I want it to be meaningful, as I always do, so sometimes these stories and words can get away from subject, especially in our world today, where we're used to little nuggets of information and, what do they call it? Sound bites. So I would like each video to have enough to digest that it's meaningful to watch and listen to as a podcast, but also that it doesn't drone on so long that points get lost and, too much is covered. So, having said all of that, let's get into it. He titles this one Nichiren. So this is meant, again, this is one of those different types of letters and goshos. We've been reading many personal letters, right, addressing personal issues and of varying sorts. This is not meant as a personal letter. It's meant as an overall doctrine, a teaching that all his followers, disciples, inner circle, outer circle, whatever, that all should hear very clearly what he's saying in this Gosho. This is what makes it one of his, sometimes people say there's 5 major writings of Nichiren. This is one of them. Okay? So, on repaying debts of gratitude. Nichiren. The old fox never forgets the hillcock where he was born. The white turtle repaid the kindness he had received from Mao Pao. If even lowly creatures know enough to do this, then how much more should human beings? Thus Yu Yang, a worthy man of old, fell on his sword in order to repay the debt he owed his lord Chi Po. And the minister Hong Yin, for similar reasons, cut open his stomach and inserted the liver of his dead lord, Duke Yi of Wei. These are old cultural, folkloric stories, right? In the West, I suppose we could point to different fables about debts of gratitude. In the West, when we talk about these things in the Aesop's fables, Greek and other fables, we often mitigate the message with a center story that obviates forgetting the debt of gratitude. So we would have someone who would be very thankful for their influencer, and then counter and rebel against them, only to then have great remorse and come back to understanding how much they owe. That's the pattern in Western fables, right? And that's not that they didn't do that in Asia or Eastern cultures, but more often than not, there was less about forgetting it and more about repaying it. But that's a general statement. Anyway, you understand why he's pulling from these stories, not to deliberately elude your understanding. They're culturally known to him and the people he is with in Japan, right? And China and India. So he goes on. What can we say then of persons who are devoting themselves to Buddhism? Surely they should not forget the debts of gratitude they owed to their parents, their teachers, and their country. So that's pretty straightforward to understand, right? That if we can observe these patterns in nature and through cultural stories and so on and so forth, certainly as Buddhists, we should be the champions of these things. We should honor our teachers, our parents, our the environment that allows us to practice, right? In this case, country. I say it that way because there are sectarianists, I'll make up a word, who would see that that call to country as some kind of a nationalistic charge. But that's not it at all. That's a misunderstanding. It's about being able to practice this Buddhism. The tremendous fortune there is in that you can practice it, I was going to say without fear of death, but we all know Nichiren's story, right? There's a lot of threats, but still the opportunity to practice is there. So there's an homage to one's environment, which, as we know as Buddhists, is our own Gohonzon. Gohonzon is our Buddha wisdom manifest in our existence. That's what Gohonzon is, right? Not this mandala. We call it that because it's hard to have this whole sentence, this whole paragraph of information come out of your mouth in a brief little packet. So we just throw it as a description of this mandala. But this is a mandala used to invoke, actuate, realize Gohonzon. Not the Gohonzon, your Gohonzon, certainly. But this whole process of awakening, Gohonzon, is what we practice. And it sounds like Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Moving on. Yeah, it's going to take a few videos to get through this. But if one intends to repay these great debts of gratitude, one can hope to do so only if one learns and masters Buddhism, becoming a person of wisdom. What is becoming a person of wisdom? Awakening Buddha wisdom, because that Buddha wisdom is the wisdom to attain Buddhahood. That is a person of wisdom. It's all. If one does not, one will be like a man who attempts to lead a company of the blind over bridges and across rivers when he himself has sightless eyes. Can a ship steered by someone who cannot even tell the direction of the wind ever carry the traveling merchants to the mountains where the treasure lies? If one hopes to learn and master Buddhism, then one cannot do so without devoting time to the task. And if one wants to have time to spend on the undertaking, one cannot continue to wait on one's parents, one's teachers, and one's sovereign. See, there's, instead of the country, he writes sovereign. See how this meaning is about the environment supporting what you want to do? It's not a geographic or political word. Until one attains the road that leads to emancipation, one should not defer to the wishes and feelings of one's parents and teachers, no matter how reasonable they may be. So your practice of Buddhism may run very counter to your own siblings, your own family, your own parents. But your continuing to practice in lieu of that is paying your debt of gratitude to them. They don't understand it, but you should. There's a lot of complexity in this thinking, so I don't want you to miss it. Many people think that counsel such as this runs counter to secular virtues and also fails to accord with the spirit of Buddhism. Because if you look at that spiritual or superficially, you would say, well, if your parents are Zen or true word, you should honor them by practicing with them. But no, they're practicing incorrectly, or they may not practice Buddhism at all. They may believe in the spaghetti dragon surrounding the earth and orbiting with meatballs. It's not dishonorable to see the truth, practice the truth, even in the face of their resistance, because ultimately you're planting the seed into them. And remember what I've said about karma so far. Your karma is yours along with attachments and tendencies that come from your father's and your mother's karma. So changing their karma is actually in part your karma. That is our connection. Nichiren continues, but in fact secular texts, such as the classic of filial piety, make clear that there are times when one can be a loyal minister or a filial child only by refusing to obey the wishes of one's sovereign or parents. Because there's a role reversal. They are your teachers until they're not, until you know better. And then you become the teacher. It is your connection. That's the filial thing. It is your connection to these people that's important, because as I've already described, they are part of you. Your karma, I should say. Right? And in the sacred scriptures of Buddhism, it is said, quote, by renouncing one's obligations and entering the Buddhist life, one can truly repay those obligations in full, end quote. So there it is. Khan refused to go along with his sovereign's wishes and thereby came to be known as a worthy man. This is another local story, right? Prince Siddhartha disobeyed his father, King Suddhodana, and yet became the most outstanding filial son in all the threefold world. These are examples of what I mean. Of course, Siddhartha is Shakyamuni Buddha. His father didn't want him to go off and study with monks. He was grooming him, giving him the perfect idyllic life. Stay here and you will continue to experience that and you will become a king. And Siddhartha said, no, I have to go figure out why everyone else is suffering. That's a pretty big refutation of parent. And yet, look who we're talking about, Shakyamuni Buddha. Ultimately, his father gained tremendous spiritual wealth and strength and enlightenment because his son went on his own path. Once I had understood this and prepared to cease deferring to my parents and teachers and instead delve into the truths of Buddhism, I found that there are 10 clear mirrors that reflect the sacred doctrines of the Buddha's lifetime of teachings. These are the 10 schools of Buddhism known as the Dharma Analysis Treasury, Establishment of Truth, Precepts, Dharma Characteristics, 3 Treatises, True Word, the sutra, not the sect, Flower Garland, the Avatamsaka Sutra, Pure Land, Zen, and Tendai Lotus schools. Scholars today believe that with these 10 schools as enlightened teachers, one should understand the heart of all the sacred scriptures and claim that these 10 mirrors, all in an accurate manner, reflect the path of the Buddhist teachings. However, we may set aside for now the 3 Hinayana schools, the Dharma Analysis Treasury, Establishment of Truth, and Precepts. They are like a message that is somehow sent to a foreign country by a private citizen and therefore lacks authority. Those were the early teachings where he was basically a prep school, trying to get the people of his day, Shakyamuni's day, to start to develop their minds and their capacity to understand more profoundly the nature of life. So there's good in these. They're 3 of the 10, but we don't need to focus our attention on addition and subtraction. Again, the math analogy, right? We take it as read that we all know how to add 1 and 1 equals 2. So I'm not going to focus on that right now. I'm going to focus on trigonometry and calculus and physics and so on. That's an analogy, right? So he goes on, but the 7 Mahayana schools are a great ship that can carry us across the vast sea of the sufferings of birth and death and take us to the shore of the pure land. By practicing, now you see where that quote comes from. You see that and read that in other letters and Nichiren practices. This is the Gosho where he originally says it, right? By practicing and understanding them, we can save ourselves and at the same time lead others to salvation. When, with this thought in mind, I began to examine them, I found that each of the 7 Mahayana schools sings its own praises, saving our school, quote, and our school alone represents the very heart of the Buddha's lifetime of teachings. There are men such as Tu Shun, Chi Yin, Fat Sang, and Cheng Quan of the Flower Garland School, Hu Tsang, Tzu En, Chi Chao, and Chi Shou of the Dharma Characteristic School, He Swang and Chi Xiang of the 3 Treatises School, Shan Wu Wei, Chinkan Chi, Pu Kung, Kobo, Chikaku, and Chisho of the True Word School, Bodhidharma, Hui Go, and Hui Nen of the Zen School, and Dao Cho, Shan Tao, Huai Kang, and Genku of the Pure Land School, basing themselves on the particular sutras and treatises favored by their respective schools. These leaders of the various schools all claim that our school, quote unquote, understands all of the myriad sutras, that our school has grasped the innermost meaning of the Buddha's teachings. Thus, some of these men claim, quote, the Flower Garland Sutra is the first among all the sutras. Other sutras, such as the Lotus and the Mahavarachana, are its underlings, end quote. Again, the leader of the True Word School claim, quote, the Mahavarachana Sutra is the first among all the sutras. The other sutras are like crowds of little stars, end quote. The men of the Zen school say the Lankavatara Sutra is the first among all the sutras, and so forth for the men of the various other schools. The many Buddhist teachers whose names I have listed above are honored by the people of our time, who pay reverence to them in the way that all the heavenly deities pay reverence to the Lord Chakra, and follow them in the way the host of stars follows the sun and moon. For ordinary people like us, whomever we may take as our teacher, if we have a resolute mind and conviction in them, then we will not think him inadequate in any way. But though others may still revere and believe in the teachers of their respective schools, I, Nichiren, have found it difficult to dispel my doubts. So you see, he's taken the premise in this letter that it's fairly simple to understand the depth of practice as a Buddhist, that we are honoring our mentors, our parents, our filial responsibilities, right? Our debts of gratitude. But now he's taken that as a launching pad to get into what has happened throughout the history of Japan and the teachings throughout Shakyamuni's entire teaching life and the history in between of the last 2,200 years, all the way up to Dengyo in Japan, and the height of the Tendai school also chipped away at by these other would-be prominent leaders. And so he's kind of shifted our attention a little bit, but Nichiren always comes back to center. So let's continue a little further and see if I can read enough to where he makes his more general point, his circling back around. When we look at the world, we find each of the various schools saying, "We are the one, we are the one." But within a nation, there can be only one man who is a sovereign. If two men try to become sovereign, the country will know no peace, civil war, right? Likewise, if one house has two masters, it will surely face destruction. Must it not be the same with the sutras? Among the various sutras, there must be one that is the monarch of all. Yet the 10 schools and 7 schools I have mentioned all argue with one another over which of the sutras it is and can reach no consensus. It is as though 7 men or 10 men were all trying to be the monarch of a single nation. A nation not so much geographically, but again, the minds and hearts, right? Thus keeping the populace in constant turmoil. Wondering how to resolve this dilemma, I made a vow. I decided that I would not heed the claims of these 8 or 10 schools, but would do as the great teacher Tendai did, and let the sutras themselves be my sole teacher. In that way, determining which of the various teachings of the Buddha's lifetime are superior and which are inferior. Not that they're bad, but where's the ultimate, what's the point of all of this? Which teaching has the key that unlocks the gist of the main drive, the ultimate practice? They can't all be right. Buddhism was created by a man who experienced enlightenment for himself and wanted to teach other people how they could achieve it for themselves. So there has to be one way. Everyone may come to it individually slightly different, but they all should be aiming at the same target. If there's 10 targets, how can you ever hit the supposed target? It may not even be in those various targets. The target may be some elsewhere altogether. Certainly in the teachings themselves, this should become obvious. Remember the exhortation by Shakyamuni: study all of Buddhism. Study all Buddhist and non-Buddhist teachings, for within that you will identify your path to this clear moment. And that moment is the same for everyone. We already have it. It is the life process. So we inculcate it, there's that word again, into our lives as we are born into it. And each successive moment, from moment to moment, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. Okay? In a scripture called the Nirvana Sutra, the Buddha says, quote, "Rely on the law and not upon the persons." So we have a filial obligation to our teachers, mentors, but and sovereign. But don't forget that all of that obligation is superseded by the direction in which it is moving. Remember, we can rebel against our sovereign and our parents if we understand the truth more clearly. But we have to know that we understand it. So Nichiren is saying he dedicated his life to that knowing. And he's finding validation already in the Nirvana Sutra that Just because Jikaku declares that the true word school is actually better than the Tendai school, that he knows better, doesn't mean that he does. He certainly believes he does, and he's trying to tell as many people that he can touch that his understanding is the correct one. But there's reason to doubt that because he's deviated from a path that was strong for 700 years. So why all of a sudden? And Nichiren's going to be treated the same way, right? He knows this. That's why he's going through these trials. But his scholarship is so commanding that no one can argue. Well, they do argue with him, but nobody can win the argument because his doctrinal knowledge and from the sutras themselves obviates what the truth is. So that's kind of exciting that Buddhism has that tight of a scholarship in it that if you just bother to learn it, to study it, that the core of it, the meaning of it, is evident to everyone. So that's kind of exciting, isn't it? Relying on the law means relying on the various sutras. Not relying upon persons means not relying on persons other than the Buddha. It's his teaching. Such as the Bodhisattvas, Universal Worthy, and Manjushri, or the various Buddhist teachers I have enumerated earlier. In the same sutra, the Buddha also says, quote, rely on sutras that are complete and final, and not on those that are not complete and final, end quote. So the Buddha, Shakyamuni himself said, look, not everything all the sermons that I've given have been the ultimate sermon. Many, many, many of them are simply, how do you call it? Incomplete. They're a teaching to get you to the next stage of understanding. So rely on the ones that they themselves, in my sermon, say, this is the complete and final. Not of a stage, not of a particular learning, but of enlightenment, of Buddhism, of ultimately Myoho Rengekyo. When he speaks of the sutras that are complete and final, he is referring to the Lotus Sutra. And when he speaks of those that are not complete and final, he means the Flower Garland, Mahavarachana, Nirvana, and other sutras preached before, during, and after the Lotus Sutra. And he says it in this way, Nichiren does, because this is a direct take from the Innumerable Meanings Sutra, which is the opening of the Lotus Sutra, right? Shakyamuni said, among all the sutras, all the teachings that I've given you over the years, the last 40 years, and the ones that I preached now, or may preach from this point forward as I wait to enter nirvana, none will surpass this Lotus Sutra. This is the goal of all these teachings. This is expressly given from Shakyamuni Buddha's own teaching. So obviously that one's complete and final, right? So Nichiren isn't making this up. He's not saying this is the superior one because I like it more or because I'm smarter than everyone else. That's not what he's doing. He's relying, as Buddha said, not on the teachings, not on the people, not on the schools, not on the sects, but only the teachings. The answer is in the teachings. Rely on that. And this is what Nichiren's whole life is about, right? Okay. If we are to believe these dying words of the Buddha, we must conclude that the Lotus Sutra is the only bright mirror we should have, and that through it we can understand the heart of all the sutras. Isn't this what we're supposed to be doing as Buddhists? Finding the meaning, not getting hung up on the words. But when the words and the meaning agree, that's tough to avoid, isn't it? Accordingly, let us turn to the text of the Lotus Sutra itself. There we find it stated, quote, that this Lotus Sutra is the secret storehouse of the Buddhas, the thus come ones. In other words, all of our Buddha experience is in this Myoho Renge-kyo, this sermon, this teaching, the Lotus Sutra. All Buddhas, and that means all of us. Among the sutras, it holds the highest place, end quote. This is Shakyamuni saying it. So what the heck is Jikaku talking about? What is Kobo talking about? He's countering the founder of the teachings themselves. How can they do that? That's just wrong. Obviously, right? And that's what Nichiren does. He's the one standing up in the crowd. Think of it in more colloquial Western terms, the story of the emperor's new clothes, right? Nichiren is that kid going, wait a minute, the emperor's naked. What? Right? If we accept these words of the sutra, then like the Lord Chakra dwelling on the peak of Mount Sumeru, like the wish-granting jewel that crowns the wheel-turning kings, like the moon that dwells above the forest of trees, like the knot of flesh that tops the head of the Buddha, so the Lotus Sutra stands like a wish-granting jewel crowning the flower garland, Mahavarachana, Nirvana, and all other sutras. So this is something you've heard me say many times. The Lotus Sutra stands atop all of the other sutras. This is another way to say it, right? If we set aside the pronouncements of the scholars and teachers that rely upon the text of the Lotus of the Sutra, then we can see that the Lotus Sutra is superior to the Mahavarachana, flower garland, and all the other sutras as plainly and as easily as a sighted person can distinguish heaven from earth when the sun is shining in a clear blue sky. And it's as obvious as that. If you stand outside during the daytime on a sunny day, you can certainly tell the difference, or that there is a separation, a difference between the sky and the ground. Can you not? It's that obvious. So why doesn't everybody understand this, right? And if we examine the text of the Mahavarachana, flower garland, and the other sutras, we will find that there are not a word or even a brushstroke in them that resembles the above cited passage of the Lotus Sutra. Oh, that's even more profound, more obvious. True, at times they speak about the superiority of the Mahayana Sutras as compared to the Hinayana Sutras in general reference, right? Or of the Buddhist truth as opposed to the secular truth, or they praise the truth of the middle way as opposed to the various views that phenomena are non-substantial or that they have only temporary existence, right? These are all building blocks of Buddhism he's referring to. But in fact, they are like the rulers of petty kingdoms who, when addressing their subjects, speak of themselves as great kings. It is the Lotus Sutra, that in comparison to these various rulers, is the true great king. I think with that, now he's going to go into more. I think with that, we can begin to understand where Nichiren is headed here. And I'll give you a preview, in case you're not there yet. And this may be the first you've heard of this sutra, or sutra, sorry. Well, it is a teaching, it is a sutra, but it's we call it a go-sho because it's Nichiren's writing. If for us, almost 3,000 years ago, a great teacher travels throughout a country teaching a great truth, all of the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years that have gone between, with all these great scholars taking on the mantle of this great teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, and substantiating what he says, exploring what he says, extracting the meaning out of every word and translating it for their environments, their time, the capacity of their people, whether it's India or China or Korea or Japan or Vietnam or Burma, whatever level they practice, they study the forms of Buddhism that they all study. Certainly they all believe they're paying homage to Shakyamuni Buddha. What Nichiren is pointing out here, though, is that if you really want to pay homage to your mentor, teacher, sovereign, parent, teacher, sovereign, right, the three aspects we're always talking about in Buddhism, then wouldn't you do well to understand fully their teaching? Right? If you want to honor your mother and you don't know who she is, then all you can honor is the concept of mother. But you can make up any story about what she is according to your needs and desires and attachments, right? But if you want to truly pay homage to your mother, you have to know your mother. And you have to know what she considered to be the ultimate expression of her motherness, right? Otherwise, you're just appeasing your own joys and needs and desires, not really hers, what she represented, right? You can honor what she represented to you, but that's you again. So what Nichiren is saying is, if you're going to honor the great teachings of Buddhism, you must honor what Shakyamuni was actually trying to teach. Otherwise, you're doing something else. And ultimately, in his own words, Shakyamuni Buddha said, this Lotus Sutra, this is the jewel. This is no other, anything else I've said in the past that I'm saying to you on a different day now or tomorrow. This is what it's all about, this Lotus Sutra. This is the core. This is the ultimate, what I'm trying to get. All of this other language is about getting you to this point. So if you call yourself a Buddhist and you want to spread the knowledge and the practice of Buddhism, then you have a filial responsibility to Shakyamuni Buddha. And if that's the case, then you should be expounding the teaching as he prescribed it. Otherwise, you're actually counter. You're an enemy. You're a jealous brother. You're a detraction from this central point that Shakyamuni was trying to teach us. If you're not granting that that's the superior teaching, in agreement with Shakyamuni himself, then what are you doing? And more importantly, how could you do that? Not only are you missing the mark, but you're poisoning the well. You're not repaying your debt of gratitude. You're taking and running. This is Nichiren's central point. So this is a very, very strong and powerful Gosho. We'll get more into it in part 2. Thank you so much for participating so far. Think about this. Reread it for yourself. See how Nichiren constructs his scholarship and his argument. He's proficient at it. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you so much for being here. Remember that you can always download the audio from all of these videos as an audio file, a podcast for you to listen to anywhere and anytime you like. The Buddhahood Podcast is the label I've given to those audio files. You can find it on wherever you get your podcasts. If there's more and more podcast providers every day, so if you use one or like one more than another that I haven't connected with, let me know in the comments, and I will endeavor to put them there. All right? Thank you so much. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo.